In August 1971, Stanford University psychology professor Philip Zimbardo flipped a coin and assigned 24 male college students to play the roles of either guards or prisoners in a simulated basement jail. The experiment was scheduled to run for 2 full weeks. It was completely shut down after 6 days because the students playing guards became so severely abusive that the faux prisoners began suffering genuine psychological distress. For the next 5 decades, the Stanford Prison Experiment became one of the most cited studies in the history of psychology. It was taught in introductory courses globally as definitive proof that ordinary, decent people, when placed in roles of authority over others, spontaneously turn cruel. That conclusion crept out of the classroom and into actual policy. It influenced modern prison design, guided guard training, shaped debates over military conduct, and even formed the basis of legal arguments during the Abu Ghraib trials. A single 6-day event in a California basement had calcified into an untouchable piece of scientific doctrine, explaining the darkest mechanics of human nature. Then, in 2018, journalist Ben Blum published an investigation relying on newly available documents and forgotten audio recordings of the experiment. The tapes revealed that the guards' behavior was heavily manufactured. Zimbardo and his research assistants explicitly coached the guards to be cruel, instructing them to apply psychological pressure and deny the prisoners sleep. The most notoriously abusive guard in the study came forward to admit that he had deliberately invented a sadistic character to play. He was putting on a conscious performance, not succumbing to the overwhelming pressure of his environment. The most famous psychological study of a generation had been presented to the scientific community and the public under completely false pretenses. Zimbardo's original intention was to measure how much our immediate environment dictates our actions, as opposed to our inherent moral character. To test this, his team screened the volunteers to ensure they were entirely psychologically healthy, and then arranged for real city police officers to arrest the assigned prisoners at their homes in a shocking, unannounced raid. The aesthetic details were meticulously chosen to create a strict hierarchy. The guards were handed khaki uniforms, wooden batons, and reflective sunglasses to hide their eyes. The prisoners were stripped down, dressed in loose smocks, and referred to only by assigned numbers. The official narrative promoted by Zimbardo for decades was that these props and circumstances triggered an immediate, spontaneous transformation. The guards naturally adopted an authoritarian persona, while the prisoners degraded into passive submission. Zimbardo even claimed that he became so absorbed in his own role as the prison superintendent that he ignored the escalating abuse. It took a visit from an outside psychologist, who was horrified by what she saw, to finally force him to halt the study. The academic world quickly accepted this sequence of events. It aligned neatly with other major research of the era and offered a highly digestible explanation for complex historical atrocities. The scientific community embraced the findings because they provided a perfectly packaged, easily communicable answer to the terrifying problem of how ordinary people commit acts of extreme evil. The 2018 audio recordings completely dismantle that official story of organic decay. On tape, Zimbardo and his staff can be heard giving explicit stage directions. They mandate that the guards act tough, utilize psychological torment, and enforce severe sleep deprivation on the subjects. This brings us back to Dave Eshelman, the participant whose extreme abuse was often cited as the prime example of the study's dark revelations. In post-experiment interviews, Eshelman stated he was consciously testing how far he could push a villainous persona he had drafted in his own mind. His cruelty was a calculated, theatrical choice. The suffering inflicted in that basement was the direct result of researchers directing their subjects to cause harm and willing actors choosing to deliver the requested performance. If the guards were acting on instructions and performing invented roles, the entire central thesis of the study, that authority automatically and spontaneously corrupts, has no factual basis in the Stanford Prison Experiment. Zimbardo has continuously contested the 2018 findings, defending the integrity of his work and maintaining a heated debate within the psychological community over how the results should be interpreted. Regardless of that ongoing debate, one unassailable fact remains. Critical details regarding the active coaching of the guards were hidden from peer review and public scrutiny for nearly 50 years. A heavily manipulated study was allowed to dictate the global understanding of human psychology for half a century, simply because the story it told was too compelling for anyone to rigorously question. The broader idea that our circumstances heavily shape our behavior remains a highly documented and well-supported scientific concept. It just doesn't require a flawed basement experiment to prove it. Next time, we leave the basement and travel to the sprawling, high-altitude ridges above Cusco, Peru. There sits the ancient Inca fortress of Sacsayhuaman, an architectural marvel built using irregular stone blocks that weigh up to 300 tons each. Without modern machinery, these massive stones were fitted together with perfect millimeter precision at an elevation of 3,700 meters above sea level. How an ancient civilization managed this staggering engineering feat remains one of history's most baffling mysteries.